There's something running your life that you've never formally met. Not your habits, not your fears in the ordinary sense of that word, something older than your habits and deeper than your ordinary fears. Something that was formed in the earliest and most vulnerable period of your existence, in response to experiences you did not choose, in an environment you did not select, by a nervous system doing the only thing it knew how to do: adapt, protect, survive. Carl Jung called it the shadow. Gabor Maté, working within that tradition, while grounding it in 50 years of clinical observation, called it the unintegrated self. The part of you that was never welcomed. The qualities, the feelings, the impulses, the genuine expressions of who you actually were, that the early environment could not hold, and that you, with the extraordinary intelligence of a young person who needed to belong more than they needed to be complete, learned to seal away. And here is what most conversations about the shadow never say clearly enough. The shadow does not simply sit quietly in storage, waiting for you to be ready to deal with it. It operates daily in the reactive anger that arises before you have decided to be angry, in the self-sabotage that appears precisely when something genuinely good is within reach, in the judgment that rises toward other people with a heat and a personal investment that the situation itself does not warrant, in the exhaustion that has no external explanation, in the relationships that reproduce the same essential dynamic regardless of how different the people involved appear on the surface. The shadow is not a problem to be solved. It is a part of yourself that has been asking for years or decades to be met. And the cost of not meeting it, the specific, cumulative, entirely predictable cost of a self that remains divided against its own unsealed wholeness, is paid in every area of life that the shadow touches, which is every area of life. The 21-day practice I'm going to give you today is not a technique for eliminating the shadow. Nothing eliminates it. The shadow is not an aberration or a malfunction. It is the rest of you, the genuine, human, completely understandable rest of you that the early environment could not accommodate. What the practice offers is something more genuinely valuable than elimination. It offers integration. The gradual, honest, patient process of meeting what has been sealed, understanding why it was sealed, and beginning, imperfectly and without completion, to allow it back into conscious relationship with the self. If you are ready for that, if something in you recognizes that what I'm describing is not a new idea, but a long-avoided one, drop 777 in the comments right now. 777. The frequency of the one who's finally ready to meet what has been hidden. Not to be frightened by it, not to be overwhelmed by it, to meet it with the same quality of honest, compassionate, genuine curiosity that genuine integration actually requires. Type 777 and let us begin. Before the practice itself, something needs to be understood about how the shadow forms. Because without understanding the formation, the practice can easily become another form of self-improvement project organized around the same managed self that created the division in the first place. The shadow forms through a simple mechanism that operates in every human developmental environment, to varying degrees and with varying consequences. The child arrives whole, capable of the full range of human emotional and behavioral expression. And the child encounters an environment that responds differently to different parts of that wholeness. Some expressions are welcomed, some are met with warmth, with attention, with the specific quality of genuine reception that the developing nervous system requires. Others are met with discomfort, with withdrawal, with the subtle but unmistakable communication that this particular quality, this anger, this need, this exuberance, this sadness, this ambition, this vulnerability is not what is wanted here. And the child, whose need for belonging genuinely exceeds their need for completeness at that stage of development, makes the adaptation. The unwelcome quality is suppressed, denied, driven underground. The identity that forms around the welcome qualities begins to treat the suppressed ones as not self, as things that other people have but that I do not have, as qualities to be judged in others, precisely because judging them in others reinforces the seal that keeps them from being acknowledged in the self. This is the origin of the shadow, not evil, not pathology, the entirely predictable product of an entirely human developmental process in which belonging required a narrowing of the expressed self. The 21-day practice works with this understanding at every level. It does not ask you to suddenly embrace everything you have been suppressing. It does not require dramatic confrontation with the parts of yourself you have most thoroughly disowned. It asks something both simpler and more challenging than either of those things. It asks you to become genuinely curious for 21 consecutive days about the specific places where the shadow reveals itself in ordinary life. In the first 7 days, the practice is entirely observational. Nothing is changed, nothing is confronted, nothing is worked on in any active sense. For 7 days, you simply observe. You carry a quality of honest, non-judgmental attention through your ordinary life, and you notice 3 specific things. You notice your disproportionate reactions, the moments when your emotional response to a situation is clearly larger than the situation itself warrants. You notice what you judge most harshly in others, the qualities that produce the most personal, most heated, most invested quality of disapproval. And you notice what you find yourself unable to receive, the compliments you deflect, the care you redirect, the acknowledgments you minimize before they can fully land. These 3 windows, disproportionate reaction, harsh judgment, inability to receive, are the shadow's most consistent and most accessible points of revelation. They do not require depth psychological training to observe. They require only the willingness to pay honest attention to what is actually happening in the ordinary moments of an ordinary day. Write nothing down in this first week. Simply observe. The act of observation itself, without the pressure of analysis or action or the performance of insight, is the beginning of the relationship with the shadow that the practice is building. The shadow that has been operating below the level of awareness becomes slightly more visible simply by being honestly attended to. And visibility, even without any subsequent action, begins to change the relationship. In the second 7 days, the practice deepens. Having spent a week observing, you now bring one question to each observation as it occurs. The question is not complicated. It is simply this: what is this protecting? When the disproportionate reaction arises, ask what it is protecting. When the harsh judgment surfaces, ask what quality in yourself the judgment is keeping sealed. When the inability to receive occurs, ask what the refusal to be received is protecting the self from experiencing. These questions are not meant to produce immediate answers. In many cases, they will not produce immediate answers. The shadow has been operating below conscious awareness for a reason, and it does not yield its contents instantly to the first genuine inquiry. What the questions produce in the second week is a quality of genuine curiosity directed at the very material that has been most consistently avoided. And that curiosity, honest, patient, non-demanding, is itself the most important thing the second week requires. Notice what arises in response to the questions. Not what you think should arise, what actually arises. The memory that surfaces unexpectedly, the feeling that appears before the explanation for it, the sudden recognition that the thing you are judging most harshly in that specific person is something you experienced most painfully in yourself at a time when experiencing it was not safe. These arisings are not to be analyzed or acted upon in the moment. They are to be received. Simply received with the same quality of honest, compassionate attention that the first week was building the capacity for. In the third and final 7 days, the practice asks something more directly from you. Having spent 2 weeks observing the shadow and becoming genuinely curious about what each observation is protecting, you now bring one act of conscious acknowledgement to the material that has been surfacing. Not acknowledgement in any dramatic or public sense, private acknowledgement. The specific interior act of saying, not performing, but genuinely saying to the part of yourself that the shadow contains, I see you. I understand why you are here. I know what you were protecting me from, and I am not going to seal you away again. This acknowledgement is not forgiveness in the sense of approving of the shadow's influence on your life. It is not the endorsement of every impulse or feeling that has been operating from below the surface. It is something more precise and more important than either of those things. It is the genuine recognition of the intelligent, self-protective, completely understandable origin of the sealed quality offered to the part of yourself that built the seal with the same compassion you would offer to a person you genuinely loved who had done the same thing for the same reasons. That compassionate recognition, offered daily in the small and ordinary moments when the shadow reveals itself across the final 7 days of the practice, is the mechanism of integration, not dramatic catharsis, not the sudden flooding of previously sealed material into conscious awareness. The quiet, consistent, genuinely felt acknowledgement that the rest of you is real, was real, has always been real, and is now, for the first time in however long the sealing has been in place, being met with something other than continued suppression. Over 21 days, this practice does not complete the integration of the shadow. Nothing completes it in 21 days. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something that genuine psychological work cannot deliver. What 21 days of this practice does produce, genuinely, documentably, in the experience of anyone who does it with honest attention and genuine patience, is a changed relationship with the shadow's influence. The disproportionate reactions do not disappear, but they become more visible as they are arising, which means they begin to be workable in a way they were not when they were operating entirely below the surface. The harsh judgments do not cease, but the person who has spent 21 days observing their judgments as windows into the shadow begins to experience the judgment's heat differently. Less as simply what the other person deserves, and more as information about where the shadow is still active. The inability to receive begins, slowly and imperfectly, to soften. Not because the material that made receiving feel dangerous has been resolved, but because the consistent practice of turning toward that material with curiosity rather than continued avoidance has begun to shift the interior atmosphere from one organized around sealing to one that is at least partly organized around genuine interest in what has been sealed. These changes are quiet. They will not be dramatic enough to announce. They will not produce the sudden, visible, externally confirmable transformation that the title of this video was pointing toward. What they will produce is something more genuinely valuable than that. A self that is slightly less divided against itself, a daily life that is slightly more available to be genuinely inhabited because slightly less of its energy is consumed by the management of the sealed material. A quality of presence in relationships that is slightly more genuine because the shadow's influence on those relationships is slightly more visible and therefore slightly more workable. And that slight but genuine and real shift, accumulated across days and weeks and months and eventually years of honest practice, is what the integration of the shadow actually produces over time, not the elimination of the division. The gradual, authentic, never completed, but genuinely ongoing movement toward wholeness, toward the specific quality of being alive in your own life that becomes available when the self is no longer spending its primary energy managing what it has decided cannot be seen. The shadow is not your enemy. It never was. It is the most loyal, the most faithful, the most persistently present part of yourself, the part that refused to disappear even when every social and relational pressure demanded that it do so. The qualities sealed in the shadow are almost always the most human qualities available. The ones that required too much, or revealed too much, or connected too directly to the genuine vulnerability of genuine humanness to be safe in the environment where they first appeared. They deserve, at minimum, the 21 days you are being asked to give them. The honest observation of the first week, the genuine curiosity of the second, the compassionate acknowledgement of the third, and beyond the 21 days, in the ordinary, continuing, never completed work of a life that is genuinely oriented toward its own wholeness, they deserve the ongoing quality of attention that only you can give them, because no one else has access to your shadow. No one else can observe its specific revelations in your specific ordinary life. No one else can bring the compassion of curiosity that the sealing requires to be undone. No one else can offer the acknowledgement that the sealed parts of yourself have been waiting for. Only you. And the privilege of a lifetime, the one that points towards something more genuinely important than any technique or practice or 21-day program can fully capture. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, all of you, including what was sealed, especially what was sealed.